Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our program, Christians for Yoruba Nation. Today is December the 9th, 2017. And I have with me on today's program, Pastor Goke Afolayan and Mr. Femi Odedeyi. You are welcome, sirs.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to be talking about Nigeria and the Libya issues that is currently going on. Of course, we know that the slave trade of African migrants, including Nigerians, is currently ongoing in Libya. So we are going to start with Pastor Afolayan. And the question is, how should Nigeria government productively respond to this barbaric problem that is presently going on or that is facing African continent?
Well, thank you very much. I think beyond the question of response, one of the things we should address is how did the situation get to this stage? And I believe that one of the basic things the Libyans and many like nations that are currently engaged in slaving Africans and Nigerians in particular reference is because Nigeria as a nation has failed to care for its people. We have a government that fails in providing the basic essential amenities for quality of life for citizens. So these citizens live in Nigeria en masse because of lack of confidence in their own nation. An adage says that if you put a price of $1 on a family member or on a relative, somebody will come around and want to price it for a penny. So when you have failed to take care of your base, when you have failed in the basic responsibility of the government to its citizens, and the citizens begin to now look for a better lifestyle somewhere else, then this problem, one of the things that can happen is this problem we're talking about. They are seeking to leave Nigeria en masse under some deceit or false pretense. They end up in Libya. Some of them planning to cross from Libya, cross the Mediterranean to the sea, to Europe. So the problem is not the response, but part of the solution is addressing the main issue. I think this should call to awareness Nigerian people and the current government that Nigeria has to rethink about provision of basic infrastructure for its people. When these people see that here is a government that does not care about its own people, then they are at liberty to do whatever they want with their citizens. We know that our foreign embassies are nonchalant about things, negative things that might happen to Nigerians abroad or in foreign country. I don't recall an event the Nigerian government picks up aggressively or mistreatment of Nigeria on any soil. So they tend to take care of the situation then, and they do whatever they can. I think before it gets to this stage, we should have sat back and look at how do we handle this. So to answer the question, I don't think it's a question of response per se, but a question of going back and begin to reshape our nation. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to move to Mr. Odedeyi, and I'm going to pose to you the same question, sir. The slave trade of African immigrants that is currently include the Nigerians that are going on in Libya right now. How should government productively respond to the barbaric problem facing African continent?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's tragic and also funny in the sense that what we are witnessing in Libya is a manifestation of the disease of the post-colonial state. the symbolism of a slave auction, which was what happened during the transatlantic slave trade, where they get black people onto the auction blocks and sell them, was exactly what they are doing or what they did in Libya. But what the end result, what has been happening what happened in Libya is also the culmination of what has been happening for the past several years, where African migrants use Libya as a staging post for onward movement into Europe. And that also happened because the Libyan state itself collapsed after the murder of Muammar Gaddafi. And then all things broke loose from that end. But what I said, it is the manifestation of the collapse of the post-colonial state is this. African countries were not created as countries by the peoples of the countries that we have. There is a story, there is a book, The Coming Revolutions in Black Africa by Professor Akintoye, where something was narrated that the British guy was sitting with the Emir of Yola in Nigeria, and the Emir didn't know that Yola had already been partitioned between Britain and France, and he was sitting there as if he's the Emir of, So you have a situation where we have been reduced to nothingness by the mere existence of the post-colonial state. When we now express outrage at what happened in Libya, there was a time when the Nigerian president, who called himself a military president at that time, Babangida, was saying that it is good for people to migrate out of Nigeria because they'll be bringing foreign exchange. So you can see the transition, that was in the 80s when the structural adjustment program was introduced. It was the middle class that initially left. They were lucky because they were able to get visas. They were able to get jobs abroad, find their ways. After the middle class, now the lower classes, but because these people don't have any professional skills as it were, even if they claim to be graduates of universities, they had no means like they had in the 80s. So they had to go through the Sahara Desert and go through all these kind of things. So the question is not just about what the government should do. Yes, Baba Buhari, president of Nigeria, has said that they will do this and that. General Obasanjo said they lamented the question of leadership in Africa. But the point is, as if I say I'm a Nigerian or a Ghanaian, in what way has that been an expression of my worldview? No African country is an expression of the worldview of its citizens. And if you don't have that, you cannot have any confidence. You cannot have any. So you just become a thing. You become a commodity. A commodity that can be traded anywhere. So those of us already ensconced in the Western countries are usually, we are lucky, just in a shade better than those who are being auctioned off. So in answer to your question, the answer simply is that we have to rediscover what I would call our natural identity. Our natural cultural, cosmological identity that make us a people. It is when you do that you have confidence in yourself. You will be able to build institutions that will sustain your development as a people. And then other people will respect you, and you will not just be running all over the world as if, like a headless chicken, as it were. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. I'm going to go back to Pastor Afolayan. When you were speaking, you did talk about Nigerians does not have confidence in their government. So the current Nigeria president, Muhammadu Buhari, of course, he came to power because people want change and people want something better than what they had. And so he became a president with the hope of, having a better Nigeria. So for him to come to power, people must have had confidence in him, and people must have believed him that, yes, he can bring the change that is needed to Nigeria. So how come now, all of a sudden, that Nigeria, even after the election, after all that is happening and is in power, how come the Nigerians still finding it difficult to have confidence in their government if everyone want to cross the border, go to another country and seeking for a greener pasture?
Well, a little bit different to what my colleague has just said in terms of the peoples not being able to identify themselves with their natural nation. I think that's another whole topic that we might not be able to explore in its entirety on this program, because I strongly believe in that as well, that the peoples of Africa, they find themselves in nations that are identified for them or that are made for them by the colonial administration. But in terms of the situation of things as they are currently, as the Nigerian state remains, if I might call it a country state, as it is now, with President Buhari as the president, I, for one, don't expect that in a 4-year term that the current president will be able to effect all the changes that we expect to happen. I think it behoves every Nigerian, especially in the role of governance, to think deep to them about what governance is all about. If an average senator or a person in office has so much dollar equivalent or millions of naira in allowances, and yet it's difficult to pay a minimum wage of either 14,000 naira or 18,000 naira per month to your citizens. And state governments are owing 3 months, 4 months, some 6 months, some almost a year. And yet when you look at the people in government, they are amassing wealth. It's so sad. And I think that if we don't sit back and make those changes and just speak to our own conscience as people, what we are seeing in Libya now will just be a minute aspect of what will happen to that state country of Nigeria, because people will literally go out and almost submit themselves as slaves out there. When you have college graduates who can't find employment, when individuals who want to start something, they have no means of doing that. The country is very much oblivious to the suffering of average Nigerians. So the natural thing is for the individual to want to seek greener pastures somewhere else. So I don't think that a single administration in one term can effectively change the problem or solve the problem that we have in that country state as it were now. Yes, we can, or the administration can begin to handle things a little bit at a time. I have not been able to assess how much or how effective this administration has been, unfortunately, in resolving most of the problem facing the nation. If they were expecting him as when he came into power to solve all the problem, that would be a joke. I think most of the solution also will come from us as a people, individuals taking responsibilities in terms of what we are as a nation, building a nation, having a sense of loyalty to that nation, patriotism, which is completely lacking. An average child growing up in Nigeria and an average youth will see any governmental opportunity as a means of enriching themselves. So that has been a culture, and I think we have to win ourselves from that culture. Yes, the government can help, but I think if we just wait for a government of the day to change things, we will have a long way to go. Now, on a bigger solution, I would think that if we realize that we are not just one country, if we're able to handle that country issue, that nationality issue, and get ourselves to the normal God-given country that we are, we might be of a smaller dimension, a more natural inclination to build a nation for ourselves than the amalgamated country state that we are now, and we're expecting a single central government to be able to solve the problem. I think it will be far, far hard to reach. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And to all our listeners, I just want to re-emphasize that we are Christians for Yoruba nations, and we are on this program today talking about Nigeria and Libya, Series 1. So if you would like to send us your questions, which we are going to provide you with answers, if you want it back in written, or you want us to respond to it on the air, don't hesitate to get back to us on Christians for Yoruba Nation at gmail.com. And I must say that we're currently working on our website, and we are going to be bringing that to you as soon as we publish the website. Back to you, Mr. Odedeye. You did mention about having an institution that sustains itself. So can you explain to our listener how can Nigeria build an institution that can fully sustain itself? Let me say this before you answer that. French president was with the Ghana president the other day, and the Ghana president responded to him stating that we can no longer, now Ghana president speaking, says that we can no longer rely on the aid that French or other European nations are giving us. We must be able to live independently, making decisions for ourselves, which I think was a brilliant thing that he said, and probably the French president was somehow disappointed, I believe. And so how do, because it's basically talking about building an institution that is self-sustained. So, and you did mention about having that institution. So I want you to expatiate on that, how Nigeria can have an institution that is self-sustained.
Yeah, okay. To answer the question, I will also have to ask myself a question. I'll probably ask the forum a question and then use that as the launch pad for the response. And the question is this: can a post-colonial state be a model for development? In other words, when the African nations were created, only in a few circumstances in Nigeria and stuff like that, the creators had an economic and political motive for making it so. So everything about that state will favor the ongoing. That was why the French president was surprised about what the Ghanaian president said, because the whole architecture of the post-colonial state is in aid of Western economies. So it is not possible for them to create a state architecture that will aid their economy, to now create an institution that will negate that architecture. So the first thing that will have to happen, even when I mention institutions, is to negate that architecture right from the beginning. And that is what Africans don't want to face. I think 2 or 3 months ago, the same French president was talking something about African underdevelopment being because of too many children that were born in Africa and all that. And then we know in the Francophone countries of West Africa, the so-called Francophone countries of West Africa, 50% of their treasury is controlled by France, by the French Central Bank. So how can you expect a country, all the Francophone West African countries, with 50% of their economy in French hands, to develop any credible institution that will develop any part of those countries? In Nigeria, when Brexit became the vogue, and they were challenging Theresa May and all that, and then she said they are going to go for what she called Empire 2. What did she base the Empire 2 on? The former British colonial empires, of which Nigeria was a prime member. So everything points to whether we as a people, as Africans, can ever hope to have any modicum of development under the architecture created by the colonial forces. And the question of institutions now come into play. Like, since we are also Nigerians and we are talking about Nigeria, and this time around, there is also a question of restructuring and all the rest, and everybody is making their own things in Nigeria. Then we have to go back to the drawing board, that what I would call the founding fathers, especially the Yoruba founding fathers, discovered that they cannot make any headway under the colonial architecture. That was why the question of federalism started in Yoruba land, that look, everybody must go ahead and develop from their cultural roots. It is those cultural roots that will now influence the development of institutions, without which, that's why you see that any constitution, including in Nigeria, any African constitution is usually messed around with. No government respects its own constitutions in Africa. We have different examples of it. They will write a constitution, no matter how beautifully worded. The first thing that will happen, it is that the government that got elected on the basis of that constitution will start violating the articles of that constitution. So they don't respect it because it is not part of the people. There is a report. There is the Chinese government has a what they call the Confucius Institute. Confucius, we know the French, the Chinese philosopher and stuff. So they are planting all those institutes all over the place to teach people Chinese language. Then you start wondering, well, someone said Chinese is going to be the next lingua franca in Africa. Then you start wondering why we started with French, German, Portuguese, English, and now Chinese. Not one African language is being developed. So when you combine all of these things, then you say there's no way. You can only be a clone of what they wanted you to be. So when we are talking about institutions, we have to start from that cultural root. That one, how does my cosmogony determine the kind of state structure that we have? In other words, what is my worldview? Your worldview is expressed in your language. When you lose your language, you lose your worldview. You are now using another person's worldview to express yourself. So the first way to address the institutional thing is to get back into where we can start our worldview. And it's happening in Nigeria, like I said, so that when the next elections is coming, they said the presidential election is coming in February 2019. So what I expect the Yoruba people to do is not to expect that, oh, this guy will do something for us, that guy will do something for us. We have gone beyond that stage. What are we going to do for ourselves? And at this point, I just quickly want to recommend this small pamphlet. It's available online. It's called The Draft of the Yoruba Constitution. The Draft of the Yoruba Constitution. That is what the Yoruba should start agitating for, because everything is in there: justice, economy, and all the rest of it. So we have to take back. So the first way to do that is to make sure that we have our political and cultural space where we can develop these things. And that is how the question of institutions can be resolved. And thankfully, the South government, the Western governments, the Western governors, the current governors in the Western states said that they are going to present a common position on what is going on. So the question now is, we have to address what that position is. We have to let our governors know this is our position, and our position should be anchored on this draft Yoruba constitution. I hope
All right. Thank you, sir. As we wind down on our program today, just to let our listener know that we are Christians for Yoruba Nation, and you can send us your question. Email us at christiansforyorubanation@gmail.com. One of our goal is to help nations realize their identity. So when you hear Christians for Yoruba Nation, we are not seeking for Yoruba Nation Christians. We are helping nations realizing their identity, as we know that the so-called Nigeria that we have today is amalgamation of many nations. So with that being said, to you, Pastor Afolayan, this is going to be my last question for you today as we wind down. You did talk about having a sense of loyalty to the country Nigeria. So what will you tell the youth that are seeking, to go into political office? There are some that really they want to make the change needed. Some are admired to be the one that will be part of the change. So how will you tell them, if you come across them, to have a loyalty to the nation?
Well, thank you very much. I think in terms of that, like I said in my response ago, it's quite a more broad subject to talk about in terms of national issue. I will encourage every youth to go back in history and avail themselves of historical information about development of African nations, especially how the nation as it was today, Nigeria, became a nation of Nigeria, up to the point of the mid-50s, when our founding fathers that would I say fought for our independence. It wasn't a physical warfare, but made a struggle for our independence. They had a concept in mind. They did not have a concept of such a central Nigerian government as it was today. That came about by military administration in Nigeria. I think the agreement then was very much something that we could have worked upon if we allowed it to develop. Each region recognized itself, and each of them had its own constitution. The idea was to have a weak, quote unquote, central government and more autonomy to the regional government, more as a United States of different nation groups. And I think if we had studied that way, we would have been able to develop into a state where each people will be a country by themselves, be able to govern themselves, be able to identify what is good and what they need to develop themselves to be able to compete with the world at large and provide for themselves what is essential infrastructure for humanity in their nation. But the military administration have essentially destroyed that. A few weeks ago, we talked about, not on this program, how much of truncation the military coups in Nigeria had on the moving forward of nation building for each of the regions. So if an average youth will go back and we begin to energize ourselves and talk about it and think more about going back to the constitutions that we have left for each region. I think we can begin to develop something from that. So in that capacity then, I believe each nation group will be able to find commonalities for which they can work and develop themselves versus the central government that we have now that really encourages individuals to be corrupt because we're as divided as the many nations or the natural nations are divided. So I would say research begin to work towards go back to that restructuring thing and let's go back to the table and then we can be politically involved or they can be politically involved on that canvas and they can pick things off from there. So that would be my advice to young people out there. I mean, enrich yourself with the historical truth, historical facts about these things, and we can move on from there. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Odede, I'm going to give you to say the final word on today's program. But before then, it's going to be 30 seconds, so keep that in mind. Of course, despite what is going on in Libya right now, the slave trade in this 21st century, which is completely barbaric and so sad, there are still some Nigerians that if they find the way of going to Libya today, they will still go. So what would you say if you come across a Nigerian that says, well, if I find my way, I'll still go to Libya anyway. Maybe I can make it. Your final word.
It will be unfortunate. You see, the reason why they will say that is because Europe or Euro-America at one point in time was able to address its underdevelopment problems. So the struggle between underdevelopment and development in Europe and America led to the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution led to the development of capitalism and what we are seeing today. So they were able to engage in that kind of struggle in their societies to create what we are. So what we are, in a sense, without being too inhuman, is like we are running away from the problem. That is because we think there is a solution in Europe. So anytime the problem comes, we run away. That's why I mentioned earlier on, the middle class ran away in the 80s, the lower middle class in the 90s, and now everybody is now, some are now going through the Sahara Desert. So the question now, so what I will say is, what is keeping us from confronting the problem that is alienating us from our society? So if I see the youth or even the elders, the Yoruba say, the synergy between the youth and the old, made it possible to establish the society. So the question is, it is our responsibility. We don't need to run away, but we need to face the problem, address it, and it is possible. And since we are Christians for Yoruba Nation, we are saying with God, all things are possible. And God has made it clear, abundantly clear, that we are all natural nations. God created all the cultures. So once you start removing yourself away from the culture that God created you to be, then, you fall into all these kind of things. So we need to go back, and like my pastor said, delve into our history. These things are there. It's not something that can be made or that we are making up. They are there. They fought for it. That was why in Western region today, the West, the Yoruba people today, revere Awolowo. Not because he dropped from the sky or anything, but because he took the bull by the horns, looked at the problem and said the only way to resolve it is through that cultural alignment. And that's what we need to do now.
All right, thank you, sir. Even though you took more than 30 seconds. To you, Pastor Volayan, in 30 seconds, final word on Nigeria and Libya Series 1.
Thank you for giving me a chance for that final word. I would say this should be an eye-opener to the government of Nigeria, the government of the day, and to the peoples of Nigeria that one, the grass is not necessarily greener on the other side of the fence, as people say. Number two, don't feel powerless. I think, in addition to what my colleague has just said, people are leaving the country en masse because they feel powerless about changing the situation in their country, and they want to survive because they feel it's always better somewhere else. I think we can sit down and look for a way to address this problem, and I think it's purely our inability to govern ourselves the way we should. We're so much self-centered that we see governmental position as a way of enriching ourselves rather than developing our nation. So I think this should be an eye-opener for us to see it. If we don't, the worst is yet to come. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Pastor Afolayan and Mr. Adedeyi, and a big thank you to our producer. But before we go, I just want to let our listener knows that, or our viewers knows that we are Christians for Yoruba Nation. You can reach us through the email christiansforyorubanation@gmail.com. And today we have talked about Nigeria and Libya Series 1. And as we all know that if you are in power, or if you are you put people into politics as a leader, you must know that the only reason why people keep voting for you or your people is because they trust in you, they have confidence in you. And now that the people are trying to cross the border on a daily basis, going to Libya, that brought about this disaster over Nigeria, is because they start to lose that confidence in the government. And so your job as a political leader, as someone who's holding the office, is to start to make these people, the Nigerians, to trust in you, believe in you. And don't forget to have people to be loyalty to you as a politician that hold the office, people to be loyalty to the country, Nigeria itself. We must start to deal with the problem from the grassroots. And one of the things that we can do is to start cherishing our language. Okay, because people must have a sense of loyalty to their nation. Today, everybody speaks in America and they finish, they say, God bless America. How many Nigerians will wake up and talk and say, God bless Nigeria? So we have to develop that habit, and we must build an institution that can sustain itself, just like the Ghana president says. So don't forget, when you lose your language, you lose your word feel. Again, my name is the son of Oluwabi. Thank you, and have a wonderful week.
Thank you.